So while you enjoy the tea and the rice, the chant master should lead the prayer.
Sanje Shadang, Sanje Chonam La, Chanju Bato, Tani Gips, Tage Jeshe Gibe, Sanam Gi, Dola Venja, Sanje Doverish, Sanje Shadang, Sanje Chonam La, Chanju Bato, Tani Gips, Tage Jesu Gibe, Sanam Gi, Dola Venja, Sanje Doverish, Sanje Shadang, Sanje Chonam La, Chanju Bato.
Tri Jamsaradai.
through the collections of merit and wisdom by giving and so forth. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I seek refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened. Through the collections of merit and wisdom, by giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. This is calling on all the gods, non-gods, demigods, and so forth to come forth and listen to the teaching. There's nothing greater to listen to than the holy, the sacred Dharma, the sublime Dharma. This is nectar to hear to your ears, and it is the medicine that cures the disease of the three mental afflictions. I pay homage to the Gautama, who, moved by his compassion, taught this sacred Dharma to rid us of all distorted views. So today, this is the month of the miracles, as it's called, and so for about 600 years, the Mönlam, or prayer festival, has been held in Lhasa. So this is to commemorate the kindness of the Guru, the Guru Shakyamuni, Buddha Shakyamuni. In his time, there were non-Buddhist practitioners with whom he had debates or discussions. And this month, and so to commemorate that, we hold the Mönlam festival every year this month. So the verses that I recited, so what it says is, it's summoning the so everyone, all the gods and so forth on the side of light or darkness, want happiness, and the root of happiness lies in your mind. So reaching nirvana or liberation takes time, but on a daily basis, through your own way of thinking, you should be able to achieve peace of mind. So whether you are a believer or not, it is about using your mind. So everyone wants happiness, whether you are a believer or a non-believer. Even birds and animals, when there are no immediate danger, they really remain relaxed and peacefully. So fear, anger, and suspicion make us unhappy. So these are because of the unhappiness that we experience is because of our unruly mind. So these the factors which cause us unhappiness are termed as afflictive emotions, mental afflictions. So in the Indian tradition, for over thousands of years, the emphasis is not given on the sensorial experiences of our visual perception, auditory perception, and so forth, which are directed towards external objects, but they have recognized mental afflictions, although there are degrees of subtlety in between the traditions like Buddhism and non-Buddhist traditions of India. So the experiences that we have, which as soon as they arise, as soon as they happen to us, cause us to lose our peace of mind, are termed as mental afflictions. And so these mental afflictions, these faults of our mind, are dispelled. And so the way it is done is not by some blessing of the Buddha, but the Buddha himself has said, the sages do not wash away the sins of beings, nor do they remove their suffering with their hands, nor do they shift their own realization to others, but by showing reality as it is, they lead beings to nirvana or liberation. And so, this is what the Buddha says. The sages do not wash away the sins of beings, nor do they remove their suffering with their hands, nor do they shift their realization to others. So how do the Buddhas help sentient beings? Is by showing the reality as it is and lead them to liberation. So suffering comes because of our unruly mind, this undisciplined, uncontrolled mind. So because of some incorrect reason, and also because of our narrow-mindedness, we perceive things to have as if they have some kind of independent existence, and we get attached to things that look beautiful, and the greater your attachment to them, then the greater your unhappiness when certain opposition to those things that you consider as attractive comes about. And therefore, anger and hatred arise in us. So it's not only the talk of religion, but, and I know American scientists like Aaron Beck, who is now around 97. When I first met him, he was 84. And then a few years ago, I purposely went to see him. So he's not talking about religion as such, but he is someone who has treated people with psychiatric problem due to anger and so forth, mainly. And so by helping people to calm themselves down through his advice and counsel, so we could call him like a medical doctor. So he was helping such people with psychiatric problems for several decades. And so from his experience, he concluded that when someone becomes angry at somebody or something, that person or the object looks absolutely negative. But when you closely look at the object, this negativeness that you see in the object, 90% of it is our own mental projection. In reality, the object at which you are angry is not that bad and negative. So in Buddhism also, Master Nagarjuna says, elimination of karma and delusions, there is liberation. And karma and delusions, or karma and mental afflictions arise due to our conceptual exaggeration. And he also says, attachment, anger, and ignorance arise through our misconception. And this misconception, which exaggerates things, which sees things that are beautiful as absolutely beautiful, that things that are unattractive as absolutely unattractive, but these are mental projections. So the scientists are also paying attention to these explanations in Buddhism about psychology, and also in science there is quantum physics, which is a new concept that arose in the West. And according to quantum physics, they say that nothing exists objectively. Of course, they are talking about matter. So when you break down material things into their smallest particles, smallest constituent factors, they say that nothing whatever could be found as being this or that. So form and so forth. So the scientists, even though they focus on material things, they say that if they are, if they have a very strong conviction that things do not have any objective existence, not just on an intellectual knowledge level, but real and on an experiential level, then because of their understanding and their conviction that things have no objective existence, they don't see things in black and white, in terms of black and white. So Buddhism also, which teaches that things are dependently originated, teaches that the teaching of the Buddha cures the disease of mental afflictions, and the process of overcoming these mental afflictions is by understanding reality, as I already quoted the Buddha saying that the sages teach reality as it is to lead beings to liberation. So Buddha himself didn't give teaching right away after becoming enlightened. He remained in the forest, and he said that this profound, peaceful, unfabricated, clear light, uncompounded phenomena, which is like a nectar. If I were to teach it to anyone, nobody will understand me. Therefore, I shall remain silent in the forest. And then later, when the time was ripe for people to receive, for beings to receive his teachings, he gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. Teaching the Four Noble Truths in repeating it 3 times regarding the nature of the Four Noble Truths, and then the function of the Four Noble Truths, and then the result of the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. So, of course, what we see when we look around us is that things have some kind of an independent existence, but this is a misconception, and therefore any misconception or distorted view will always have an opposite wisdom or understanding that can dispel it. So what we are talking about here is perceiving and conceiving things to have some kind of a true independent existence. And we actually fall for that kind of existence. Things appear to us as if they have some independent existence. Independent existence, and just as they appear that way, we also cling on to them as having some independent existence, and that is countered in the teaching of the Buddha by using logic and reasoning to make transformation of our mind. That's the way Indian religious traditions, philosophical traditions, and particularly Buddhism deals with the negative these mental afflictions. So we don't only pray to the Buddha to overcome these mental afflictions, but follow his teaching, the path that he has shown to us. And the result of that is to overcome and eliminate all mental afflictions. So in the world, there's an endless conflict and problems that are man-made. And some of the scientists even say today that basic human nature is compassionate. So if that is the case, that we are compassionate, compassion is our basic nature, right from the beginning, right from our birth, we have love towards our mother, as the mother also, our mother also has love for us. So without this, the child would not survive. Right after birth, if our mother had not given us love, and we would not have survived. And if we, as children of our mothers, have not shown love towards her, we would not also, we won't be able to live our life. So though the basic human nature is compassionate, as the scientists say, how much killing is going on is caused by human beings. While we are peaceful here, in other parts of the world there are thousands of people being killed, and then children dying of starvation. So these are made by human beings ourselves. Of course, natural disasters such as earthquake and storms and so forth could kill people, but we can't do much. But when it's the case that human beings are killing other human beings, this is something imaginable. So this happens because we are not paying good attention to our basic good quality of love and compassion, but we are more or less carried away by the external glamorous things, the glamour. And so although all the 7 billion people on earth want happiness, but still there are people who cause suffering to others. Whether you are a believer or not, or whether you're following any religion, we should be able to see the faults of our attachment, anger, and so forth, and try to develop the good qualities. As I usually say, everywhere in the world, people are paying attention to education, but the so-called modern education is more or less oriented towards material progress and development. And so we need to introduce in this modern educational system the teaching about our secular ethics, which has been practiced in India for thousands of years, and the Constitution of India is also based on secularity. So which is to say that it respects all religions as well as those without religion. So this is very relevant to today's world, the secular ethics principle, because more than 1 billion people on earth are without religious faith. So it's not the case that those practicing religion or following religion need love and not the others, the non-believers. But everyone needs love. So while we are alive, if we could live in love and compassion, it would be very good for our health as well. And so it is very important to understand that the teaching of the Buddha is to rid us of, it's to cure the disease of the mental afflictions. So as I quoted earlier, the karma and the delusions, ending them leads to liberation, and karma and delusions are rooted, they arise through conceptual exaggeration, and this in turn arise from grasping at true existence in things, independent existence in things, and this should be ended or eliminated through the meditation on emptiness. And it doesn't happen right away, of course. We should hear the teaching on emptiness, contemplate on it, and then apply your understanding and conviction in the emptiness, in meditation, to gain deeper insight and real experience so that you are able to eliminate it, this true existence in things and the conception. So with regard to this quotation, the final line says, and this is ended by emptiness. So in the Sanskrit version, this final line could either be interpreted in terms of the path or the cessation. So as follower of Buddhism, we need to know who the Buddha is. It's not enough just to say that the Buddha is someone who has these physical features with the 32 minor and 80 major and 80 minor marks and so forth, but you need to really understand his teaching well, without any bias, whereby you would be attached to one's own tradition and averse towards those of other traditions. But the more you delve into the teaching of the Buddha through logic and reasoning, it'll become more clear that it is scientific. It can go on par with science. But I do not say that Buddhism is the best religion in the world. Whether Buddhism or any other religion is the best or not depends on individuals. So if a religion is suitable to some individual, that individual, that religion is the best one for them. The Buddha himself, when he gave the teachings, he gave teachings to different disciples with different dispositions. The first teaching of the Four Noble Truths were given to certain beings, certain disciples, and then the teachings on the second teachings of the second turning of the wheel of Dharma were given to different disciples, and then the third turning of the wheel also were given. And so the first teaching of the Buddha teaches a more coarser level of understanding of selflessness, whereas the second turning of the second sermon gives teaching on the subtle selflessness of a person. And the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha gave certain interpretations of his first two teachings, and then says that those of dependent nature So in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, one aspect of it is the Sandinimochana Sutra, where the Buddha was asked, why did he teach differently in the first and second sermons? So the Buddha gave the answer accordingly. So Buddha didn't impose or force his final teaching of emptiness to all his disciples. Therefore, we have to understand that the Buddha gave the different teachings according to the different mental dispositions of his disciples. And therefore, we cannot say that Buddhism is the best religion in the world. And we should also understand that the other religion, except the other religions to be beneficial to their own followers. So in our secular schools, in the past, we had teachers who were called religious instructors. But some years ago, I suggested that we should not call them a religious instructor as such, because religion is something that is common. But Buddhism has its own unique philosophical understanding, philosophical teachings, and therefore we should. I suggested to change the name to philosophy teacher. So in philosophical terms, we have different concepts in the different religious traditions. So the teaching of the Buddha is about checking your mind. And therefore, in the teaching of the Buddha, there are lots of teachings on psychology. And when we talk about psychology, we are talking about transforming our mind. And this transformation is brought about through an analysis and investigation into the teaching by using logic. And therefore, by using logic and reasoning, we would be able to actually pierce through the faults of our mental afflictions. As I had said earlier, when you are very angry at something or somebody, the thing is, or the person is seen absolutely negative, but that distortion is seen through when you are able to look at these mental afflictions through reason and logic. And therefore, I've been saying that psychology should be part of our, as an academic subject, not just a religious one. In the school systems, of course, we have physical exercises, the physical training as one of the subjects for physical health, and then we are told that such and such things are helpful to our body, and such substances are bad for our health, and so forth. And so, just as we do pay attention to physical hygiene, we need also to pay attention to mental hygiene by seeing what kind of states of mind gives us peace of mind, and what are those factors which arouse these negative emotions in us. And so psychology should be part of our school curriculum. Emotional hygiene of emotion should be part of our curriculum. We do not need to talk about past and future lives or nirvana and so forth, but in this very life, to reduce our anger and so forth, and to create a more peaceful world, we need to include or introduce this hygiene of emotions. So when it comes to transforming our emotions, we find more information and techniques in the Indian systems of thought than the others. For example, the Judeo-Christian traditions emphasize more on faith in the Creator God. Whereas in India, of course, there were theistic religions and also non-theistic religions. And the Indian traditions talk about life after life. So psychology is quite a prevalent subject in the Indian traditional thoughts. And so these traditional Indian thoughts explain the workings of our emotions, mind. So to commemorate the Buddha and think of, remember his kindness, and also to be able to see the Buddha as a totally reliable being, we have this tradition of reading the Jataka Tales. And it was written by Aryashura, who became a disciple of Aryadeva, one of the disciples of Arya Nagarjuna. So the Jataka Tales tell us the stories of the Buddha when he was a trainee on the path to enlightenment, through which he became totally, fully enlightened. So for many lifetimes, having practiced love, compassion, and so forth, he became finally enlightened. So if even in lives as beasts, the great-minded have been known to practice charity, who then, being human, should not be charitable? In the middle of the forest was a clearing once frequented by ascetics. There the earth was carpeted with soft green grass, and so forth. So this is talking about the practitioners of ascetics practicing meditation. In this forest, the Bodhisattva lived as a hare or a rabbit, an animal that shone with such goodness, such vigor, such strength and beauty that all the other animals in the forest looked to him as their king, none fearing him, none causing him fear, satisfying his needs by simple blades of grass, wearing his own fur on the ascetic's garments. He glowed like a great being. Everything he thought, everything he spoke, everything he did was motivated by friendliness or compassion or love, so pure and simple that even those beasts, usually given to wickedness, became his students and friends. Among his devoted following, 3 in particular were attracted by the love and respect with which his eminent qualities inspired, and they grew to be his constant companions, an otter, a jackal, and a monkey. These 3 loved the hare as if he were their kin, their mutual bond of respect binding them together in joy. They spent all their days with him, soon forgetting their lower natures, and compassion for all living beings, creatures, flowed from their hearts. Greed no longer tempted them. They forgot how to steal, and their lives began to conform closely to the Dharma. Their minds became disciplined, clear, and strong. How remarkable to hear of a human being who chooses the path of virtue from the 2 ways of action which accords with pleasure but goes against virtue, or action which is in harmony with virtue but not with pleasure. Imagine how astonishing it was to hear the 4 beasts who have made such a choice. So I'll leave the teaching on the Jataka tale here, and then I wish to switch to the other text, in Praise of the Buddha for Teaching Dependent Origination, which I received the transmission of from the Kinori master Rinzin Tempa. So I've asked to print the book. So it begins with a homage to Manjushri in Sanskrit, Namo Guru Manjugoshaya. So in Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna praises the Buddha from the unique quality of teaching dependent origination of things. So many of his hymns were written from this point of view. In one of the texts, he says, I pay homage to the sage, the great sage, who taught dependent origination. And in Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the Buddha says, I pay homage So he pays homage to the Buddha in Mula Madhyamaka Karika for teaching dependent origination, which is devoid of or absent of the 8 extremes of arising, ceasing, and so forth. And so this text begins with a homage to the Buddha by saying, he who speaks on the basis of seeing, making him the knower and exalt, and who teaches this, making him the teacher and exalt. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught. And so, by seeing reality as it is, precisely as it is, and thereby making us able to completely destroy all the mental afflictions which are rooted in this grasping at true independent existence and things, and make us reach the goal of enlightenment. So all the traditions of Tibet, such as the Mahamudra and the Great Perfection and so forth, emphasize the nature of the mind itself. And the mind is seen as not having in its intrinsic nature those of the mental afflictions. And in the teaching of the perfection of wisdom, emptiness is taught in great detail. And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha gave teaching on Buddha nature. And so the second turning, which is the turning of the teaching of the Panchaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, teaches the object clear light, whereas the third turning of the wheel, such as the teachings of Tathagata Garbha, the essence of the Tathagata, teaches the subjective clear light, which is the mind, the subtle mind that is used to realize emptiness. So the mind's basic nature is clear light or luminous. And so by combining these two, the subject and object clear lights, then you do the practices that are taught in Tantra as well. And so all the Tibetan Buddhist traditions lead us to realize this nature of mind, the basic nature of mind. So with regard to dependent origination of things, why is it so important to understand this reality? Of course, we would say that our attachment and the love and compassion also are very important. because hatred, attachment, desirous attachment, and so forth disturb our own peace of mind, and they also disturb others. And therefore, in the Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says, if you're not able to exchange your own happiness and joy with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching Buddhahood, even in this life, in samsara, you will not be happy. So, understanding of the dependent origination of things helps us to rid us of the selfish attitude, self-cherishing attitude as well. And this self-cherishing attitude and that of the grasping at true existence go hand in hand and causes us ruin. And in the teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination, the first link is that of ignorance. And there are different degrees of ignorance in terms of its subtlety. And there is the ignorance of law of causality, and also the ignorance about how things are really. So we have different kinds of ignorance. But the subtle ignorance is that ignorance which holds on to things having some kind of independent objective existence, just as they do appear to us as if they have that kind of existence. And due to this ignorance, the exaggerated outlook on things being attractive, extremely attractive, or unattractive arise. This exaggeration arises in us, and then that gives rise to the rest of the mental afflictions. And therefore, understanding dependent origination, so these two words, dependent, dependence means that things are relied on others, and therefore they are devoid of any independent existence. So quantum physics also says this. And then origination means that things are dependent on others. So these two words, it shows the conventionality of things. So dependence get rid of, or that of the eternalism, and origination shows that of it rids us of the nihilism, and therefore the very word dependent origination is very powerful in eliminating the two extreme views of eternalism and nihilism. And therefore, whatever degeneration there is in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So with regards to understanding of dependent origination, there is the law of causality, understanding of law of causality, which is shared by all Buddhist traditions. And then there is dependence in terms of a whole, the parts being dependent on a whole, and a whole dependent on its parts. But the final understanding of dependent origination, as interpreted by or understood by Master Nagarjuna, is that to say that things are merely designated although things do appear to have some kind of objective existence, but they do not have that way of existence. And therefore, by default, what we can conclude is that things do exist because they affect us, and either positively or negatively, and therefore the only thing we can say is that things exist by way of designation. So in the teaching of the Buddha, there are teachings on love, compassion, tolerance, and so forth, morality and so forth, and also other religious traditions do teach this. But that the fact that things are merely designated, that things are only dependent originated, is taught in the teaching of the Buddha. So how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? So why are things dependently designated? Whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? The Buddha himself has said that what arises through conditions has no birth. It has no nature of birth as such. So if you look at the teaching of the Buddha, there are lots of teachings on which teach that things have no intrinsic inherent existence as such. In many of the teachings, whether they are scattered or not. And if you look at the perfection of wisdom teachings, you will find that after having gone through a certain topic and taught that things have no intrinsic existence, the Buddha says, although things do not have any independent intrinsic existence, they do exist by way of label and designation. And in this verse that I was quoting, it says that what arises of conditions has no birth, it has no essence of birth. And what is dependent is said to be empty of any intrinsic existence, and understanding emptiness leads one to heedfulness. And so this is what it is referring to, this verse number 5. By grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. Since this teaching is not seen elsewhere, you alone are the teacher. Like calling a fox and lion for a tirthika, it would be a word of flattery. So when we talk about something that gives a cause, it is given the name cause because it gives rise to some result or effect. So there are those philosophical schools which say that things arise through their own specific causes, and therefore they are not confused. And therefore they use the reason that things have their discrete or specific causes that give rise to their effects, to say that things have some kind of intrinsic or objective existence. Wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge, wondrous speaker, wondrous refuge. Savior, I pay homage to that teacher who taught well dependent origination to help heal sentient beings. O benefactor, you have taught the peerless reason to ascertain emptiness. So the Buddha is addressed as the wondrous teacher and wondrous refuge. The peerless reason to ascertain emptiness, the heart of the teaching. this way of dependent origination, those who perceive it as contradictory or unestablished, how can they comprehend your system? And so the contradictory is the reference to those of the non-Buddhist traditions. So for them to say that things do not have any independent existence because they are dependent is to say that things have no essential existence because they are dependent is a contradictory reason. And then for certain other traditions, this kind of reasoning is said to be unestablished reason. For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict. Whereas when one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. So when you are able to understand that things are dependently originated well, then you will see how things are empty. And emptiness here refers to being devoid of or any independent objective existence. And so, when you are able to see dependent origination of things very clearly and precisely, you'll be able to gain insight into emptiness. And when you see or understand emptiness well, this will in turn complement your understanding of the conventionalities of things. So the greater that the deeper your understanding grows, to say that things are devoid of any intrinsic existence, the measure of its being the right understanding is that your understanding and your conviction in the functionalities of the conventional phenomena also deepens. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed. So Master Nagarjuna says, if things were to have any independent existence, then it should become clearer the more you analyze it. In the world, we would also say that, oh, this person is so strong that he doesn't need to rely on any other person. Whereas if you see someone who has to rely on others, you won't say the person is independent as such. So if things were to be independently existent, then effects or results would not rely or depend on their causes. So the result and the cause are mutually dependent. Because there is a result that would arise, we would call something a cause. And that cause, because it gives rise to, because the results also arise on the basis of the independent cause, it is dependent on, the results are dependent on the cause as well. So if the results were independently existent, then they would also exist at the time of their cause. So if that were the case, then we would have to also say that action, the agent, and the acted upon object, and so forth, are not dependent on one another. So action, there is an action because of an actor, and an actor because of the action, and so forth. And so whatever there is, we could say that everything is, all of them things are dependently arisen. The non-contingent is like a sky flower, hence there is nothing that is not dependent. If things exist through their essence, their dependence on causes and conditions for their existence is a contradiction. Therefore, since no phenomena exists other than origination through dependence, no phenomena exists other than being devoid of intrinsic existence. You taught, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated, if phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, nirvana would become impossible and elaborations would not cease. You taught, therefore, who could challenge you? You who proclaim with lions roar in the assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising independent on that. What need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? It is through the reason of dependent origination that one does not lean towards an extreme. That you have declared this excellently is the reason, O Savior, of your being an unexcelled teacher. So even within the Madhyamaka system of thought, there are those philosophers who say that things do exist the way they appear to us, which means that things appear to us as having some objective existence, self-defined phenomena. And if this were not the case, if this does not exist, then we cannot say that things can exist. And this is the difficult point in Madhyamaka philosophy. Master Nagarjuna says that, Master Tsongkhapas says that to say that things are devoid of any intrinsic existence, yet they exist by way of designation, is the difficult point in Madhyamaka philosophy. And Master Tsongkhapas says that those who have, he calls friends, you, my friends, who have learned the Madhyamaka treatises, for you may find it difficult to say that although things are devoid of any independent existence, yet they do exist by way of designation. You may find it difficult to say this, but then you should direct your mind towards that. It would be better for you to assert that. And Master Chandrakirti says that if we were to actually search for the identity of things and events and so forth, within themselves nothing whatever could be found as being this and that. So if you actually assert, like the Savatantrika Madhyamakas do, that things have some objective existence, then the final analysis into the nature, the final nature of things would not be tenable. So if something exists, it could either exist by way of its own nature, or that they should exist by way of designation, and therefore in the ocean of reasoning, which is a commentary to Madhyamaka Karika, so since these are the two ways things could exist, since the first way of existence cannot be tenable, therefore, by default, things could only exist by way of designation, and therefore you should direct your mind towards that understanding. So the more you understand that things do not exist the way they appear to you, the deeper your understanding would be that things are by way of designation. And the measure of something being conventionally existence is that it is not undermined or contradicted by another valid cognition of conventional phenomena, and that it is not contradicted also by the analysis into the reality of things, the ultimate reality of things, and analysis into ultimate reality, and that it is known to some conventional, valid cognition of conventional things. So we need to counter both the self-cherishing attitude by which we actually hold ourselves more important than others and do all kinds of things to benefit oneself, and then also we need to oneself alone, and to counter this we need to develop cherishing others, and then we also need to develop this wisdom realizing emptiness and combine these two to transform our mind. So those traditions which do not assert dependent origination of things, and who assert permanence in things, and then a permanent or soul and so forth, being enslaved by ignorance, so if things were to be independently existence, if independent existence is the nature of things, then it cannot be, there cannot be change happening in things. Whereas when we say things are dependently originated, things cannot be said to have any kind of independent or existence. So these are the two ways in which things could exist: intrinsic nature, uncreated, and non-contingent. Dependent origination, contingent and created. How can these two converge upon a single basis without contradiction? Therefore, whatever originates dependently, though primordially free of intrinsic existence, appears as if it does possess intrinsic existence. So you taught all this to be illusion-like. The seventh Dalai Lama says that at the crossroad of the 6 different perceptions, the appearances, there is this hazy, dualistic appearance. But do not think that things have some independent existence, and look at the nature of emptiness. There is this deception at this crossroad of the perceptions, and do not hold on to them having any independent true existence, but look at their emptiness nature. And so when you do this meditation on emptiness, what happens is when your mind is absorbed, gets absorbed in emptiness, all the dualistic appearances of things disappear from your view. Like the cloud in the sky of an autumn sky dissipates into the sky. So in the Madhyamaka Karikapa Nagarjuna, there are lots of debates from the realists to the Madhyamakas, saying that if things were to have no intrinsic existence, then we cannot assert causality and so forth. And then Nagarjuna in his response says that you have not understood. When you say this, this shows that you have not understood the purpose of emptiness, the nature of emptiness. So the purpose of emptiness is to be able to destroy all objectification in things. So because unless you are able to do that, you would be left with some kind of objective view of things. And so the Madhyamaka tradition or system which do not assert any objective existence whatever, even in conventional terms. So this could be seen as the ultimate understanding of how things are, following Nagarjuna and then his interpreters, Master Chandrakirti and so forth. Through this very fact, I understand well the statement that to what you have taught, those opponents who challenge you cannot find faults that are caught with reason. So all the objections to the Madhyamaka system of philosophical thought, which assert that things have no intrinsic existence, whatever, can be dissolved by understanding that things, when we say that things are dependent, that they are devoid of any independent existence. So whatever is dependently arisen is said to be empty, and so forth, as Nagarjuna says. So according to Master Dharmakirti, because the Buddha is reliable in terms of the main objective of his teaching, the goal that his teaching leads to, when in terms of that he is the reliable. Of course, there are certain aspects of the teaching, like the very subtle teaching of the law of causality, which are said to be an extremely hidden phenomena. But because there are reasons to prove the other teachings, with regard to the main objective of the teaching, such as the higher rebirth, that of the liberation, enlightenment, when the Buddha, if the Buddha can be taken as reliable with regard to the teaching of on liberation, then it could be taken as reliable in other terms, such as those of the teaching on causality, which leads to, based on which we can create the causes for higher rebirth and so forth. So when you look at these teachings, I mean, you will really find them to corroborate with reality and your experience. When these wise comprehend the differences between these two, why would they not at that point revere you from the depths of their being? Verse number 33 and then 34, let alone your numerous teachings, even in the meaning of small part, those who find ascertainment in a cursory way, this brings supreme bliss to them as well. Alas, my mind was defeated by ignorance, though I have sought refuge for a long time in such an embodiment of excellence, I possess not a fraction of his qualities. Nonetheless, before the stream of this life flowing towards death has come to cease, that I have found slight faith in you, even this I think is fortunate. Among teachers, the teacher of dependent origination, among wisdom, the knowledge of dependent origination, you who are the most excellent like the kings in the world, know this perfectly well, not others. All that you have taught proceeds by way of dependent origination. That too is done for the sake of nirvana. You have no deeds that do not bring peace. So on the basis of understanding the law of causality, Master Kamalashila says that one could create the causes for higher rebirth, and by understanding that things are dependently originated, one could create the causes for liberation. And so, alas, your teaching is such, in whosoever's ears it falls, they all attain peace. So, who would not be honored to uphold your teaching? So it overcomes all opposing challenges. It's free from the contradictions between earlier and later paths. It grants fulfilling of beings two aims. So the two aims are attaining higher rebirth and that of nirvana or liberation, as explained. For this system, my joy increases ever more. Verse number 44 and 45 done. 46. This excellent system, most marvelous. Some individual who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like they entangled Belvazar grass. So there are those Indian Buddhist philosophers who relied on the Sandhi Nirmojana Sutra to understand that of the teaching of the Buddha, the second turning, and so forth. And because of the differences in their philosophical understanding within Buddhism, there are the four schools of philosophy, such as those of the Vaibhashikas, Sautantikas, Chittamatra, and Madhyamakas. And within the Madhyamakas and Sautantikas and the Chittamatras, there are those following reason and following scripture. And within those of the Madhyamakas, there are those Madhyamakas, two groups of Madhyamaka. One which assert that things have some intrinsic objective existence, and the other which deny any or reject any objective existence in things. So the study of logic was prevalent in India, and then since an ancient time, Tibetans have also taken great interest in logic and epistemology as well as Madhyamaka. So combining these two has been prevalent in India, in Tibet. Sorry. So the Indian treatises the Buddhist treatises on logic and epistemology are translated in Tibetan. So it is not these do not exist in any other Buddhist countries as well. So I say that the Buddhist tradition that we Tibetans have is the treasure of the world. So this gives us pride as well, due to the thanks to our past translators. So of course, Tibetan language was not so sophisticated in the beginning, as the translation of Buddhist texts and the scriptures from India was carried out in Tibet. Tibetan language also became enriched. So the Sanskrit tradition that existed in India, today Tibetan language is the only language which can explain this tradition of Buddhism. Not Chinese, not Vietnamese or Japanese and Korean and so forth, although they do follow the same Nalanda tradition that we have. The 300 volumes of Kanjur and Tenjur, the translated words of the Buddha, and its exegetical treatises by Indian masters are very precious. So the Kanjur and Tenjur actually has spread all over Tibet, has covered the entire land of Tibet, the three provinces of Utsang, Kham, and Dome. So not only the three provinces of Tibet, but also the adjacent lands like Ladakh, Arunachal, the Mon, and then Mongolia and so forth are also covered by these literature of Kanjur and Tenjur. So during the time of the ancient Tibetan kings, the entire Tibetan land was united, but later the Tibetan nation became fragmented. But even then, the three provinces remained united on the basis of this Ganjur and Denjur. So it's very important that we need to be harmonious, all the three provinces of Tibet, friendly and harmonious. And so during the ancient times, Tibet became very powerful and remained united, but then it became fragmented later. So later, we became quite short-sighted, calling ourselves Amdoas or Özang and so forth, Kamba and Amdo and so forth, dividing ourselves. So it's very important to remind ourselves of being one people, whatever may happen to us, good or bad, in good or bad times. It's very important for us to stay united. And then the religious traditions in India, there were the Sanskrit and Pali traditions of Buddhism. Of course, in the past and ancient times, there were disputes among the 18 different subsects of Vaibhashikas and so forth. And then in Tibet, we have these different traditions, the Nyingma, the old translation school, and then the new translation school, which comprise Gadam and Sakya, Jonang and Geluk and so forth, Gaju and so forth. So we have, in a way, of course, used attachments to cause division among ourselves, calling ourselves Kaju or Sakya and so forth. So it's very important for us to be united, to be harmonious amongst religious traditions, to be respectful and have like a mixing of milk and water where they become one. So it's very important for us to be harmonious. In Tibet, there were people remained rather distant from each other. But in exile, we need to be harmonious among the peoples of the three provinces of Tibet and also the different religious traditions outside Tibet as well as inside. This is very important to keep in mind. Of course, there are different interpretations, different ways of explaining the things. This shows the originality or the wisdom of the different masters, but we should still live in harmony. Seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones and sought your intention again and again. At such a time as I studied numerous works of our own middle way and other schools, my mind became tormented ever more constantly by a network of doubts than nightly. So there are different hymns written by Master Nagarjuna. but his what are known as the collections of reasoning by Nagarjuna, including which comprise those of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Ratnavali or Precious Garland, and then 60 stanzas of reasoning and so forth, are very important texts that we should study. The Night Lily Grove, Nagarjuna's treatises. Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, who would unravel your unexalted vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence, illuminated by the garland of white light of Chandra, referring to Chandra Kirti, well-uttered insights. Chandra, whose standless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across scripture's space. So, of course, before Master Nagarjuna, the interpreters came, they were those of the Chittamatra philosophy and the philosophers. So Chittamatra philosophy is refuted in the 400 verses by Naradeva, and also that of the Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti, who dispels the darkness of extremist hearts and outshines the constellations of false speakers. When through your through my teacher's kindness, I saw this, my mind found a rest at last. Of all your deeds, your speech is supreme. So, of course, we have this tradition of building statues and stupas and so forth. So one time I was in Revalsar, where they had built a huge statue of Guru Padmasambhava, and I was invited to consecrate it. And due to the kindness or thanks to Master Padmasambhava, the Tibetan king Tsongkhapas was able to establish Buddhism on the Tibetan soil firmly, and also so of course Master Padmasambhava is someone who is very kind to us, but I said in Revalsar at that time that this statue may remain for 1,000 years, but it'll never speak to us. And then in our seven-limb prayer, we make the request to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to turn the wheel of Dharma, in other words, to give teachings. And if we have the vision of them, the Buddha, for example, and request him to give us teaching, he may say that I have already given these teachings which are contained in the 100 volumes of Kanjur, and you never study them. So. And also Master Nagarjuna would say that he has written these Mula Madhyamaka Karika and other texts, and you have not studied them. So if you study these texts, you will be able to see the magnificence of the Tibetan language as well. And we could also unite as people of the three provinces through this language. So having met with many different scholars and practitioners, so I was a very lazy person, of course, therefore I'm not very educated, but whatever I have learned in this tradition of the Buddhist tradition that we have, I feel proud that as an academic subject, it is something which is very useful, and in terms of spiritual transformation, our tradition is very, very beneficial. And so, of course, when I listen to quantum physicists explaining that things have no objective existence and so forth, I really feel that, of course, this is very similar to the Chittamatra view that which says that things have no external existence. other than that, of course, quantum physics is not used for transforming our mind as such, and so there's not much. Nothing much amazing in it as such. But our tradition. In our tradition, we use these understandings of things having no external or no objective existence and independent existence to transform our mind. Within that too, it is the very speech. So the wise should remember the Buddha through this, the teaching of dependent origination. Following such a teacher and having become a renunciate, so Master Tsongkhapa, the author of this text, was born in Amdo, the northeastern part of Tibet, and then around when he was about 16 or so, he moved to central part of Tibet, and having studied the conqueror's words, not too poorly, he said, which means that he didn't just leave what he has studied to intellectual, superficial knowledge, but actually practiced them. This monk who strives in the yogic practices, such is the depth of his reverence to the great seer. So we should also follow in his footsteps. So we should study the teaching of the Buddha, and whatever we have learned, we need to integrate that into our own mind and then become experienced. Otherwise, lacking any study and knowledge. As Sagala, the Arahat Sagala says that the monks and nuns should not just be contented with their robes, but they should actually engage in the study and practice of the teaching of the Buddha. So, in other words, you should not divorce study, reflection, and meditation from one another. You should combine them and become a true follower of the Buddha, and thereby become someone who is able to contribute to this flourishing of the teaching of the Buddha. There are those of the people who come to these kind of teachings from people from other religious backgrounds, traditional religious backgrounds. To you, I always say that it's important to keep to your own religious tradition while you may be able to, while you should also study the teaching of the Buddha. And today, it's very important for us to have harmony amongst the religious traditions. In Syria and the Middle East, we have killing between the Shia and Sunni. Both are followers of the same teacher and the same tradition, Islam. This is very unfortunate. And then in Burma, Buddhists have killed and tortured those of the Muslims. And so religions have the message to transform our mind. So this very teaching to transform our mind, if it's used to cause more problem to others, that's very unfortunate. It's like turning a medicine into a poison. In Tibet also, there were some conflicts amongst the religious traditions, which are the Sakya, Kagyu, Geluk, and so forth. So these are unnecessary. We need to see that these are backwards or are drawbacks. So we should not go back to the old times and live a backward life, but we are at such a time that we should feel proud of the teaching of the Buddha that we have, and therefore we need to hold our head high. Since this is due to the teacher's kindness, I have met with the teaching and so forth, and may the teaching of this beneficent one till the world's end be unshaken by the winds of evil thoughts. May it always be filled with those who find conviction in the teacher by understanding the teaching's true nature. So we should be able to study the teaching of the Buddha and then see the other traditions, what kind of logical contradictions they have. And so the main teaching is that things have no independent existence, that things are dependently originated. That should be understood. May I never falter, even for an instant, to uphold the excellent way of the sage, which illuminates the principle of divine origination through my all births, even giving away my body and life. May I spend day and night carefully reflecting by what means can I enhance the teaching achieved by the Supreme Savior through the strenuous efforts over countless eons. As I strive in this with pure intentions, may Brahma, Indra, and the world's guardians and protectors such as Mahakala unswervingly always assist me. This hymn, entitled The Essence of the Well-Uttered Insights, praising the unexalted teacher, the great friend to the entire world, even to the unfamiliar, for teaching the profound dependent origination, was composed by the well-read monk Lobsang Dragpa Pel. It was written at the heavenly retreat of Lading on the towering mountain of Wadagungil, otherwise known as Gaden Nambargeva Ling. The scribe was Namka Pel. So it's 10:30 now. So this is teaching on the praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. And we are commemorating the Buddha this time. The Buddha, who was a unique teacher in teaching that of dependent origination. And so, through understanding this, we should develop faith in the teacher himself as well. So, of course, in the past, I was able to attend the bi-monthly confession of monks, and then it seems that as time passes by, I am taking leave from the different engagements one by one. This morning I didn't attend the bi-monthly confession, and now, although I did memorize those of the prayers of dedication that are said at the end of this kind of ceremony, I won't be able to say this. So we need to study the teaching of the Buddha and then reflect on the teaching, use reason, and then find faith in the teaching of the Buddha based on reason. Then it will be good to follow the teaching in this way. So the teaching of the Buddha should be introduced through teaching on the two truths, the conventional and ultimate truth, and then on the basis of that, expand on the Four Noble Truths, and then those of the teachings on the Three Jewels and so forth. So we should follow the pattern of those of sharp faculty, who use reason rather than mere faith to follow the teaching of the Buddha. So if we could actually imbibe this in ourselves, then I think the teaching of the Buddha would remain for a longer time. And I usually say this in public, that if we follow the teaching of the Buddha on the pattern of those of dull faculty or who base themselves more on faith rather than reason, then I don't know how long the teaching of the Buddha may survive. So in the past, the monasteries like the Namgyal Monastery, and then the tantric colleges, the upper and lower tantric colleges, you do in Gyume, and also the nunneries didn't have the study of philosophy. But since I urged them to study philosophy as part of their curriculum in the monasteries and nunneries, they have done that, and for years now, you have really studied philosophy, taken up the study of philosophy, and this is a very good example to the future generation, and I would like to thank you. What is the basis of the teaching of the Buddha and the progression along the path and the resultant and the result are, we should understand. I usually say that Buddhism is a very scientific religion. I do respect all the religious traditions, but the religion that can go in parallel with the science, modern science, is Buddhism, especially the Nalanda tradition. And then I also call myself a scientist. So we do not just follow the teaching on faith alone, but use reason. So if we could follow this pattern, or in the fashion, the teaching of the Buddha in the fashion of those of sharp faculty, it would be good. So keep these in mind, and thank you. This is prayer of dedication. So this prayer is through the hardships I've endured.
Tsongkhapas losa trabe shala sovade me me